She walked into the courtroom a pariah. The press called her a gold digger, a liar, and a thief. Her husband, the billionaire tech mogul Mark Bella, had the best lawyers money could buy and a prenup that was ironclad. For 3 weeks, the world watched as Catherine Bella was stripped of her dignity, her reputation, and seemingly, her future. Everyone in that courtroom, the jury, the media, even her own legal team, believed she had already lost. The verdict seemed inevitable, but they forgot one thing. In a court of law, the truth is often hidden in the silence. And just when Mark Bella thought he had won it all, Judge Harrison asked one final, simple question that changed everything. The air in the Superior Court of Manhattan was so thick with tension it felt like breathing through wool. Outside, the flashbulbs of 100 paparazzi created a lightning storm against the gray November sky. Inside, the atmosphere was sterile, cold, and smelling faintly of floor wax and old wood. At the defendant's table sat Catherine Bella. She was 34, though today she looked 50. Her blonde hair, usually pulled back in an elegant chignon, hung loosely around her face, shielding her eyes from the gallery. She wore a simple navy dress, no jewelry, no makeup. She looked less like the wife of a billionaire and more like a woman waiting for a terminal diagnosis. Across the aisle, Mark Bella was the picture of American success. At 45, the CEO of Bella Dynamics radiated the kind of confidence that only comes from having a net worth of $5 billion. He sat with his back straight, his bespoke charcoal suit absorbing the courtroom lights. He occasionally leaned over to whisper to his lead attorney, Arthur Blackwood, a man known in legal circles as the Grim Reaper for his ability to bury opponents under mountains of litigation. The case was Bella v. Bella. It wasn't just a divorce. It was a public execution. Mark was suing for a full annulment of their 10-year marriage, citing fraud, embezzlement, and adultery. If he won, Catherine would leave with nothing. No alimony, no assets, and, most devastating of all, Mark was petitioning for sole custody of their 8-year-old son, Leo, claiming Catherine was morally unfit. "Mr. Blackwood, you may call your next witness," Judge Daniel Harrison said. The judge was a man of few words, known for his piercing gaze and his low tolerance for courtroom theatrics. He adjusted his glasses, looking down at the docket with a bored expression. Arthur Blackwood stood up, buttoning his jacket. "Thank you, Your Honor." The plaintiff calls Maria Gonzalez to the stand. A murmur went through the gallery. Maria had been the Bella family's head housekeeper for 7 years. Catherine finally looked up, her eyes wide with betrayal. Maria avoided her gaze as she shuffled to the witness stand. After being sworn in, Blackwood wasted no time. "Miss Gonzalez, please describe the nature of Mrs. Bella's behavior during the months of June and July of last year." Maria gripped the railing of the stand. She was distant, sir, nervous. She would lock herself in the study for hours. She told me never to disturb her. "And did you ever see anyone visit the house while Mr. Bella was away on business?" Objection. Catherine's lawyer, a young, fiery woman named Sarah Jenkins, shot up. Hearsay. "I am asking for her direct observation, Your Honor," Blackwood countered smoothly. "Overruled," Judge Harrison grunted. "Answer the question." Maria took a shaky breath. "Yes, twice. A man, tall, dark hair. He came in the back entrance, Mrs. Bella told me. She told me he was a financial auditor. But they didn't look like they were doing taxes, sir." The courtroom erupted in whispers. Mark shook his head sadly, a performance of a heartbroken husband that was Oscar-worthy. Catherine stared at Maria, her mouth slightly open. It was a lie, a blatant, bought and paid for lie. There had never been a man. The auditor Maria was describing was likely the landscape architect Mark himself had hired, but twisted into something sordid. "And did you find anything in the trash, Miss Gonzalez? Around that same time?" Blackwood pressed, walking closer to the jury box. "Yes," Maria whispered. "Burned papers. And a second phone. A burner phone. Thank you, Miss Gonzalez. No further questions." Sarah Jenkins tried to cross-examine, but the damage was done. Maria stuck to her script. She painted Catherine as a paranoid, secretive adulteress who plotted against her husband while he was out building the future of renewable energy. By the time the lunch recess was called, the court of public opinion had already cast its verdict. Twitter was trending with number gold digger Catherine. The news anchors outside were already speculating on how much Mark would sue her for. In the holding room, Catherine sat with her head in her hands. "They're lying, Sarah," she whispered, her voice cracking. "Maria is lying. Mark paid her off. He has to have." Sarah Jenkins paced the small room. She was a good lawyer, brilliant even, but she was out of her depth. They were up against a team of 20 attorneys who had buried them in paperwork for months. "I know she's lying, Catherine. But we can't prove it. Mark has covered his tracks too well. The bank transfers he showed? The ones from your charity account to that offshore shell company? They look real." "I didn't steal that money," Catherine cried, slamming her hand on the table. "I built that charity. I used that money to build schools in Cambodia. Mark was the one who managed the accounts." "But your signature is on the transfers," Sarah said gently. "Digital signatures, sure, but verified. Expert witnesses have already testified they are authentic." Catherine slumped back. It was the same story every day. Mark was a tech genius. He could manipulate data, alter logs, and fabricate digital trails that were indistinguishable from reality. He had spent 10 years building a cage around her, and now he was locking the door. "He warned me," Catherine said, her voice hollow. "The night I told him I wanted to leave, and he didn't get angry. He didn't yell. He just poured himself a drink, looked me in the eye, and said, 'Catherine, if you try to leave me, you will leave with less than you came with. You will leave without your name, without your money, and without your son.'" Sarah stopped pacing. She looked at her client, a woman who had once been a vibrant artist, now reduced to a ghost. "We have one card left," Sarah said, though she didn't sound confident. "The timeline. Mark claims he was in Tokyo when the alleged embezzlement took place, making it impossible for him to have done it. But if we can prove he wasn't, if we can prove he was in New York, accessing those servers, he has a private jet, Sarah. He has flight logs, customs, stamps, witnesses. He was in Tokyo. Everyone makes a mistake, Catherine. Even Mark Bella. The afternoon session was even more brutal. Blackwood called a forensic accountant, a man named Dr. Eris Thorne. Thorne projected complex charts onto the courtroom screens, showing a web of transactions. As you can see, Thorne droned, using a laser pointer. The funds were siphoned from the Bella Hope Foundation into an account in the Caymans, registered to a CM Holdings. Catherine Moore is the defendant's maiden name. The IP address used to authorize these transfers traces directly back to Mrs. Bella's personal laptop. The jury looked at Catherine with disdain. It was overwhelming. The technical evidence was insurmountable. Mark sat there, his face a mask of stoic sorrow. But Catherine knew him. She saw the tiny twitch at the corner of his mouth, a smirk. He was enjoying this. He wasn't just winning, he was dismantling her existence. "Mr. Thorne," Judge Harrison interrupted, leaning forward. "You stated the IP address was Mrs. Bella's laptop. Is it possible for an IP address to be spoofed?" "Technically possible, Your Honor," Thorne admitted, "but highly unlikely given the encryption levels of the Bella Home network. It would require someone with administrative access and expert coding skills. Someone like the CEO of a tech company?" Sarah Jenkins interjected from her seat, unable to help herself. "Objection," Blackwood roared. "Sustained," the judge said, though he lingered a moment on Mark. "Counselor Jenkins, save your arguments for cross-examination." But the seed was planted. It was a tiny seed, but it was there. The day ended with Mark's team resting their case. They had presented a mountain of evidence: witness testimony, financial records, digital footprints. It was a masterclass in legal warfare. As the bailiff called for the court to rise, Mark walked past Catherine's table. He didn't look at her. He didn't need to. He simply adjusted his cufflinks and walked out the heavy oak doors, the press swallowing him whole. Catherine stood up, her legs trembling. "Tomorrow is our turn," Sarah said, gripping Catherine's arm. "We need to put you on the stand." Catherine's eyes widened. "He'll tear me apart." "It's the only way," Sarah insisted. "The jury needs to see you. Not the gold digger the media created, but the mother, the woman who built that charity. You need to tell your story." Catherine looked at the empty judge's bench. She felt a strange sensation, not hope, but a cold resolve. Mark had taken everything. He had turned her life into a lie. But there was one thing he had forgotten. There was a box. It wasn't a digital file. It wasn't a bank account. It was a physical, cardboard box of old journals and receipts she had kept in her mother's attic in Ohio, long before she moved into the Bella penthouse. Mark didn't know about the box because Mark never cared about her past. He only cared about the version of her he created. "Sarah," Catherine whispered, "I need you to send a courier to Ohio. Tonight?" Sarah frowned. "Ohio? Why?" "Because," Catherine said, her voice steadying for the first time in weeks. "Mark is a genius at controlling the present, but he's sloppy with the past." The morning of the third day, the courtroom felt different. The buzz of the paparazzi outside was louder, a relentless drone of speculation. Inside, the air was stale, recycled through vents that hadn't been cleaned in a decade. Catherine sat at the defendant's table, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles were white. The courier from Ohio had arrived at 4 a.m. Sarah Jenkins looked exhausted, dark circles under her eyes, but there was a new energy in her posture. On the table between them sat the box. It was an unassuming cardboard container, the kind used to store cheap holiday decorations, taped shut with yellowing Scotch tape. "All rise," the bailiff bellowed. Judge Harrison swept in, his black robes billowing. He looked even more impatient than the day before. He glanced at the box on the defense table, his eyebrow raising a fraction of an inch. "Miss Jenkins, are you ready to proceed?" "We are, Your Honor," Sarah said, standing. The defense calls Catherine Bella to the stand. The gallery shifted. This was the moment they had been waiting for. The gold digger was going to speak. Catherine walked to the stand. She felt the weight of 100 eyes on her back, but the heaviest gaze came from the plaintiff's table. Mark wasn't looking at her, though. He was looking at his phone, scrolling with a bored indifference that made Catherine's stomach churn. "Mrs. Bella," Sarah began gently, standing near the jury box. "You have heard the accusations against you. Fraud, embezzlement, adultery. How do you plead to these charges?" "I am innocent," Catherine said. Her voice was quiet but clear. "I have never stolen a dime. I have never been unfaithful to my husband." "Let's talk about the Bella Hope Foundation," Sarah said. "Mr. Bella claims you siphoned $3 million from the charity into a personal offshore account. He provided digital logs. Bank transfers. Can you explain that?" "The digital logs are fabrications," Catherine stated. "Mark controls the servers. He owns the ISP that services our home. He can make a computer say anything he wants it to." Arthur Blackwood, Mark's lawyer, let out a loud, theatrical sigh, checking his watch. "Mrs. Bella," Sarah continued, ignoring him. "Mr. Bella claims the foundation was funded entirely by his corporate earnings. Is that true?" "No," Catherine said. She pointed to the cardboard box. "That is why I brought this." Sarah walked to the table, cut the tape with a penknife, and pulled out a stack of tattered, leather-bound notebooks and a metal tin. She approached the witness stand. "What are these?" "These are the original ledgers," Catherine said, her fingers trembling as she touched the worn leather. "And the bank books from the First National Bank of Ohio, dating back 15 years. Before I met Mark, before Bella Dynamics existed." She opened the first book. "The foundation wasn't started with Mark's money. It was started with my grandmother's estate. She left me a patent for an agricultural polymer. She was a chemist in the 60s. The royalties from that patent started the charity. These books, they track every penny, handwritten by me and my mother, for 5 years before Mark ever got involved." Sarah handed the books to the jury. The jurors passed them around, looking at the faded ink, the coffee stains, the tangible reality of the paper. It was a stark contrast to the cold, projected spreadsheets of the day before. "Mark insisted on digitizing everything 5 years ago," Catherine explained. "He said it was for efficiency. He took the physical records, or he thought he did. He didn't know I kept the originals in Ohio." "And the offshore account?" Sarah asked. "The one in the Cayman Islands?" "I don't have a Cayman account," Catherine said. "But look at the dates in the ledger. On the day Mark claims I was in Grand Cayman opening that account, July 14th, 2019, I was in Ohio, documented here." She pulled a photo from the tin. It was a Polaroid, grainy and unstaged. It showed Catherine in a hospital room, holding the hand of an elderly woman. The date stamp on the bottom right corner was clear, the 14th of July, 2019. "My mother was dying," Catherine whispered, tears pricking her eyes. "I sat by her bedside for 3 days. I didn't leave the room, let alone the country. There is no digital record of this because the hospital was a small rural clinic. But this photo, the nurse took it for me. The courtroom was silent. For the first time, Mark looked up. His jaw tightened. He whispered something furiously to Blackwood. Sarah sat down. Your witness. Arthur Blackwood stood up slowly. He didn't look worried. He looked like a predator who had just spotted a limp. He walked to the stand, buttoning his suit jacket. Mrs. Bella, Blackwood purred. That is a very touching story. Truly. But let's look at this. Evidence. He picked up the Polaroid with 2 fingers, as if it were contaminated. A Polaroid? In the age of the iPhone? Isn't it true that you can buy vintage film online? Isn't it true that you can manipulate the date settings on these old cameras? I suppose, Catherine stammered, but I didn't. And these ledgers, Blackwood waved a hand at the books, handwritten, easily forged. You've had 6 months since the separation began. Plenty of time to buy old notebooks and write a fictional history, wouldn't you say? You are an artist, after all. You have an eye for detail. I wrote those years ago, Catherine cried. Did you? Blackwood leaned in, his face inches from hers. Or did you write them because you knew the digital trail, the immutable, encrypted blockchain trail, proved you were stealing? You are asking this jury to trust coffee-stained paper over bank-verified server logs? The logs are fake. And the man? Blackwood switched gears instantly. The man Miss Gonzalez saw? The auditor? He was a landscape architect. We contacted the firm you mentioned in your deposition, Blackwood said, his voice dropping to a dangerous low. They have no record of sending anyone to your home on those dates. In fact, on the dates Maria saw this man, your husband was in Tokyo, and your phone records, which we have subpoenaed, show 52 calls to a burner number. I never made those calls. Just like you never opened the account? Blackwood scoffed. He turned to the jury. Ladies and gentlemen, what we have here is a woman who cannot accept that her husband is simply smarter than she is. She got caught, and now she is throwing antique paper at us, hoping we are nostalgic enough to ignore the facts. Blackwood turned back to Catherine. You claim Mr. Bella is a manipulator, yet he is the one with the verifiable data. You are the one with stories. No further questions. Catherine sat there, stunned. Blackwood had taken her shield and turned it into a sword. The jury looked skeptical again. The analog defense was crumbling against the weight of modern cynicism. People didn't trust paper anymore. They trusted screens. The lunch recess was a somber affair for the defense. Sarah Jenkins was on the phone constantly, trying to find the nurse who took the photo, but it had been years. The clinic had closed due to funding cuts. The nurse had moved away. It was a dead end. He's winning, Catherine said, staring at her salad. He turned my mother's death into a forgery plot. We're not done, Sarah said, though her voice lacked conviction. We still have the character witnesses. The charity directors. Mark pays their salaries, Catherine pointed out. They won't speak against him. Back in the courtroom, the atmosphere had shifted from tension to anticipation. The gallery sensed blood. Mark's team looked relaxed, almost jubilant. The defense rests, Sarah announced reluctantly. She had no one else to call who wouldn't be shredded by Blackwood. Does the plaintiff have any rebuttal evidence? Judge Harrison asked. We do, Your Honor, Blackwood said, a smug smile spreading across his face. We have recently come into possession of a digital file that was recovered from a cloud backup Mrs. Bella thought she had deleted. We asked permission to play an audio recording. Sarah jumped up. Objection. We haven't seen this evidence. This is trial by ambush. It was discovered this morning, Your Honor, Blackwood lied smoothly. It is directly relevant to the defendant's testimony regarding her innocence. Judge Harrison rubbed his temples. I will allow it, but make it quick. Blackwood nodded to his tech assistant. The courtroom screens went black, and a waveform appeared. This recording, Blackwood announced, is from a voice memo app on Mrs. Bella's personal cloud account. Dated August 12th of last year. He pressed play. Static hissed through the courtroom speakers, followed by a voice. It was Catherine's voice. Unmistakably hers. I don't know how much longer I can keep this up, the voice on the recording said. It sounded drunk, slurring slightly. Mark suspects something. If he finds the Cayman account, I'm dead. I need to move the money again. I need to make sure he doesn't get custody. If I can just plant the drugs in his car. The recording cut off with a click. The silence that followed was deafening. Catherine stood up, knocking her chair over. That's not me. I never said that. That is not me. Order. Judge Harrison banged his gavel. Mrs. Bella, sit down. It's a fake, Catherine screamed, looking at the jury. Don't you see? He made it. He can make computers do anything. Sit down or I will hold you in contempt, Harrison roared. Sarah pulled Catherine back into her seat. Catherine was hyperventilating. The jury was looking at her with horror. The recording was damning. It wasn't just confession of theft. It was a confession of a plot to frame her husband and endanger her child. Mr. Blackwood, the judge said, his voice icy, can you authenticate this recording? We have a digital forensic certificate from Cyberwall Security, confirming the file's metadata and origin, Blackwood said, handing a document to the bailiff. It is authentic. Sarah Jenkins looked at the document. Cyberwall's Security. It was a reputable firm. If they signed off on it, the court would accept it. This is impossible, Sarah whispered to herself. Deepfakes are good, but to pass a forensic audit? Mark Bella sat perfectly still. He didn't look triumphant. He looked disappointed, shaking his head slightly as if to say, I tried to protect her, but she forced my hand. It was the ultimate gaslight. Your Honor, Sarah said, her voice shaking. We move for a mistrial. AET. This evidence is clearly fabricated using advanced AI voice synthesis. My client, denied, Judge Harrison said curtly. You have offered no proof of fabrication other than your client's outburst. The plaintiff has provided expert authentication. The evidence stands. The afternoon dragged on like a funeral procession. Blackwood delivered his closing argument early, saving time. He painted a picture of Catherine as an unstable, greedy, and vindictive woman who had been caught red-handed and was now flailing. She lied about the money, Blackwood thundered. She lied about the affair. And we just heard her, in her own voice, plotting to plant drugs on a captain of industry. This is not a mother. This is a criminal. When court adjourned for the day, Catherine was numb. She walked through the gauntlet of cameras like a zombie. Monster, someone shouted from the crowd. Lock her up. She barely heard them. That night, in Sarah's office, the mood was apocalyptic. Takeout boxes littered the table, untouched. It's over, Catherine said, staring out the window at the Manhattan skyline. He's going to take Leo. He's going to take everything. Sarah was on her laptop, frantically typing. I'm looking for Cyberwall Security. I'm looking for a connection to Mark. You won't find one, Catherine said. He uses shell companies within shell companies. He's a ghost. Suddenly, there was a knock at the office door. It was late, past 10 p.m. The building was supposed to be locked. Sarah and Catherine exchanged a look. Sarah moved slowly to the door. Who is it? A friend. A muffled male voice replied. Or, someone who wants to be. Sarah hesitated, then unlocked the door. Standing in the hallway was a man in a rain-soaked trench coat. He was older, perhaps 60, with graying hair and a face etched with deep lines of stress. He looked familiar, but Catherine couldn't place him. Who are you? Sarah asked, blocking the entrance. The man looked past her, directly at Catherine. My name is Elias Vane, he said. I was the chief technology officer at Bella Dynamics for 15 years, until Mark fired me 6 months ago. Catherine stood up. Vane? I remember you. You came to the Christmas parties. I did, Elias said. He reached into his coat pocket. Sarah flinched, but he only pulled out a small, silver USB drive. I saw the news, Elias said, his voice gravelly. I heard the recording. It's good work. Very good. It uses the new Vocalis's engine we developed in secret last year. It was designed for text-to-speech accessibility. But Mark had other ideas for it. Can you prove it? Sarah asked, snatching the USB drive from his hand. That drive contains the source code for the engine, Elias said, and the logs of the synthesis. It shows exactly when he typed the words into the terminal to generate Mrs. Bella's voice. He did it 3 days ago, from his private office. Hope, sharp and painful, rushed back into Catherine's chest. Will you testify? Elias looked down at his shoes. If I testify, he will destroy me. I signed an NDA that carries a $10 million penalty. He will sue me into oblivion. I will lose my pension, my house, everything. Then why are you here? Catherine asked. Elias looked up, his eyes wet. Because I have a grandson the same age as Leo, and I know what Mark does to people who get in his way. I can't let him raise that boy. He took a deep breath. I won't take the stand, Mrs. Bella. I can't, but I can give you the weapon. You just need to find someone who knows how to fire it. Sarah looked at the USB drive. This is inadmissible if you don't authenticate it. We need a witness. You have a witness, Elias said mysteriously. You just haven't called him yet. Who? Judge Harrison, Elias said. Sarah and Catherine looked at each other, confused. The judge? He hates us. Does he? Elias smiled grimly. Or is he just a stickler for the rules? Look into Harrison's past. Look at his first big case as a prosecutor in 1998, the State versus O'Malley. Look at the evidence that was faked in that trial. And then, look at who provided the digital forensics for the defense. Elias turned to leave. Mark thinks he controls the future, but he always forgets to delete the history. He vanished down the hallway, leaving them with a silver USB drive and a riddle that could save Catherine's life or destroy it completely. The clock on the wall of Sarah Jenkins' office read 3:14 a.m. The city of New York slept outside, a sprawling grid of darkness and scattered lights, but inside, the air was electric with the hum of a laptop fan and the frantic rustling of paper. I found it, Sarah whispered, her eyes glued to the screen. She wiped a smudge of exhaustion from her cheek. Elias was right. My God, he was right. Catherine, who had been dozing fitfully on the small leather sofa, sat up. What is it? Sarah turned the laptop around. On the screen was a scanned PDF of a court transcript from 26 years ago. The header read, State of New York v. Timothy O'Malley, 1998. Sarah explained, pointing to the text. Daniel Harrison wasn't a judge then. He was the district attorney's star prosecutor. He was young, ambitious, and had never lost a major case. O'Malley was a mob enforcer accused of a triple homicide. Harrison had him cold witnesses, motive, opportunity. So what happened? Catherine asked, moving closer. The defense produced a digital alibi, Sarah said. A time-stamped security log from an ATM in Jersey City showing O'Malley withdrawing cash at the exact moment of the murders in Queens. It was the early days of digital forensics. Nobody really understood how to verify that kind of data yet. Sarah scrolled down to the witness list. The defense called an expert witness to validate the ATM logs. A young, brilliant computer scientist who had just started a data recovery firm called Data Haven. Catherine's breath hitched as she read the name highlighted on the screen. Expert witness, Mark Bella. He was 27, Sarah murmured. Mark testified that the logs were immutable. He used technical jargon that went over the jury's head. He dazzled them with talk of encrypted timestamps and server redundancy. Harrison tried to cross-examine him, but Mark made him look like a Luddite. He humiliated Harrison in open court. And O'Malley? Acquitted, Sarah said grimly, walked free. 2 years later, it came out that Data Haven had been paid off by the mob to fabricate the logs. But by then, O'Malley had vanished, and Mark had dissolved the company and started Bella Dynamics. He buried the scandal. He scrubbed his name from the records, mostly, but he couldn't scrub the court transcript. Catherine stared at the image of a young Mark Bella in a grainy newspaper clipping. He had the same arrogant smirk even then. Judge Harrison doesn't hate us, Catherine realized, a chill running down her spine. He hates him. He knows Mark is a liar, Sarah said, pacing the room. He's been sitting on that bench for 3 days, watching Mark pull the same trick he pulled in '98. The fake logs, the technical jargon, the arrogance. Harrison recognized the pattern immediately. Then why is he being so hard on us? Catherine asked. Because he can't fight our battle for us, Sarah said, stopping in her tracks. He's a judge. He has to be impartial. If he shows bias, Mark's lawyers will file for a mistrial and get a new judge. Harrison is being hard on us because he's frustrated. He's waiting for us to give him the weapon. He needs irrefutable proof, so he can finally nail Mark to the wall without getting overturned on appeal. Sarah looked at the silver USB drive Elias Vane had left on the table. It gleamed under the desk lamp like a bullet. We can't just submit the drive, Sarah said, thinking out loud. Blackwood will object. He'll say the chain of custody is broken. He'll say Elias is a disgruntled employee. He'll say we planted the files. It will be our word against theirs. And they have the forensic experts. So what do we do? Catherine asked. We have the gun, but we can't fire it? Sarah picked up the drive and squeezed it tight. Her eyes narrowed. No, we don't fire it. We hand it to Mark and let him shoot himself. She sat back down at the computer, her fingers flying across the keyboard. Elias said this drive contains the source code for Vocalis, right? The AI that mimics voices? Yes. And he said Mark used it on his personal terminal. Yes. Sarah smiled, but it wasn't a happy smile. It was the smile of a hunter setting a snare. I'm going to spend the next 4 hours learning how Vocalis works. And tomorrow, when I recall Mark to the stand, I'm going to make him demonstrate it. He'll never agree to that, Catherine said. He won't have a choice, Sarah said. Because I'm not going to ask him to demonstrate it. I'm going to trick him into proving it exists. The courtroom on day 4 was suffocating. The air conditioning had malfunctioned, and the humidity of the approaching storm outside had seeped into the building. The gallery was packed shoulder to shoulder. The Gold Digger trial was the hottest ticket in town. When Judge Harrison took the bench, he looked tired. His eyes scanned the room, lingering for a fraction of a second on Mark Bella, who was checking his watch with exaggerated impatience. Miss Jenkins, Judge Harrison said, his voice gravelly, call your next witness. Sarah stood up. She wore a new suit today, sharp, black, predatory. She didn't look tired anymore. She looked dangerous. The defense recalls Mr. Mark Bella to the stand as a hostile witness. A ripple of surprise went through the crowd. Recalling the plaintiff? It was a desperate move. Mark smirked, buttoned his jacket, and walked to the stand. He looked at the jury, giving a small, weary shrug as if to say, let's get this over with. Mr. Bella, Sarah began, standing in the center of the well. I'd like to revisit the audio recording played yesterday, the one where my client allegedly confessed to a crime. I'd rather not relive it, Mark said smoothly. It was painful enough to hear my wife planning to frame me. Of course, Sarah said. You testified that this file was found in a cloud backup, correct? That is correct. And verified by Cyberwall's security? Yes. The metadata is pristine. Sarah walked to her table and picked up a piece of paper. Mr. Bella, you are a man of technology. You built Bella Dynamics from the ground up. You are familiar with the concept of generative adversarial networks, or GANs. Mark blinked. I am the CEO of a tech company, Miss Jenkins. Of course I know what a GAN is. It is a machine learning framework. And you are aware that GANs can be used to synthesize human speech? To create deepfakes? Mark chuckled. Miss Jenkins, this is science fiction. While theoretically possible, the technology required to create a deepfake that could fool a forensic audit, it doesn't exist. Not at that level. Not yet. So, you are stating, under oath, that there is no software in existence capable of faking your wife's voice to that degree of accuracy? I am stating that my wife is not a computer scientist, Mark deflected. She is an artist. She doesn't have access to supercomputers. But you do, Sarah shot back. Objection, Blackwood roared. Argumentative. Sustained, Judge Harrison said. But he was leaning forward. His pen hovered over his notebook. Let me rephrase, Sarah said calmly. Mr. Bella, does your company, Bella Dynamics, possess a proprietary AI engine known internally as Vocalis? Mark's face remained a mask of calm, but his left hand, resting on his knee, twitched. It was the same twitch Catherine had seen 1,000 times. We have hundreds of R&D projects, Mark said dismissively. I don't track the names of every beta test. Is Vocalis a beta test? Sarah pressed. Or is it a fully functional text-to-speech synthesis engine designed to mimic human cadence, breathing, and emotional inflection? I have no idea what you are talking about, Mark lied. It sounds like you've been reading conspiracy forums. Sarah turned to the judge. Your Honor, I would like to enter into evidence, Defense Exhibit D. She pulled the silver USB drive from her pocket. What is that? Blackwood demanded, standing up. This, Sarah said, holding it up for the jury to see, is a drive containing the source code for the Vocalis engine. It also contains the server logs from Mr. Bella's private terminal. Mark's eyes locked onto the drive. For the first time, the arrogance slipped. He looked like a wolf who had just heard the click of a trap. Objection, Blackwood shouted. We have never seen this. There is no chain of custody. This is inadmissible. Mr. Blackwood is correct, Judge Harrison said slowly. Miss Jenkins, unless you can authenticate the source of this drive, I cannot admit it. I can't authenticate the source, Your Honor, Sarah admitted. The source wishes to remain anonymous for fear of retribution. Mark relaxed visibly. He let out a breath. He had won. Without the witness, the drive was just a piece of plastic. However, Sarah continued, her voice rising, I don't need to admit the drive to prove my point. I just need to play a file that is on the drive. Objection. Hearsay. It is not hearsay if it is a demonstration, Your Honor. Sarah argued. Mr. Bella claims this technology is impossible. If I can play a recording that proves the technology exists, it impeaches his testimony regarding the impossibility of the forgery. Judge Harrison looked at Mark. He looked at the drive. He looked back at Mark. I will allow a 10-second clip, Harrison ruled, solely for the purpose of rebutting the witness's claim about the state of technology. Sarah plugged the drive into the court's laptop. She didn't look at Catherine. She looked straight at Mark. Mr. Bella, Sarah said, you claim you didn't forge the audio. You claim you didn't create a fake confession. I did not. Then please explain this. Sarah pressed play. The speakers crackled. And then, Mark Bella's voice filled the room. It was crystal clear. It was arrogant. It was terrifying. I really have to hand it to her. She almost got away. But nobody leaves me. I'll spend every dime I have to bury her. I'll buy the lawyers, I'll buy the experts, and if I have to, I'll buy the judge. Catherine leaves with nothing but the clothes on her back. The courtroom gasped. The jury's jaws dropped. Mark stood up, his face turning a violent shade of red. That is a lie. I never said that. That is a fabrication. Is it? Sarah asked, her voice cutting through the noise. How do you know, Mr. Bella? Because I would never be stupid enough to say that out loud, Mark shouted. That is a deep fake. It's a manipulation. A deep fake? Sarah asked innocently. But Mr. Bella, you just testified under oath that such technology doesn't exist. You said it was science fiction. You said it couldn't fool the ear. Mark froze. He realized the mistake. If this recording is a deep fake, Sarah said, pointing a finger at him, then you have just admitted that deep fakes of this quality are possible. And if they are possible, then Catherine's confession is worthless. That is different, Mark stammered, sweat beading on his forehead. That is entrapment. No, Mr. Bella, Judge Harrison spoke. His voice wasn't loud, but it silenced the room instantly. That is perjury. The judge took off his glasses. He looked at Mark with a cold, terrifying clarity. The look of a prosecutor who had waited 26 years for his prey to walk into the crosshairs. Mr. Bella, Harrison said, you seem very certain that the recording Miss Jenkins just played is a fake. You identified it immediately. It is. I never said those words. And yet, the judge continued, it sounds exactly like you. Just as the recording yesterday sounded exactly like your wife. Tell me, if I were to order a forensic analysis of this new recording, would I find the same pristine metadata you spoke so highly of? Mark said nothing. He couldn't speak. He was boxed in. If he said yes, he admitted the tech existed. If he said no, he admitted he was lying about the metadata. Mr. Blackwood, Judge Harrison said, turning to the defense table, I am going to call a recess. During this recess, you and your client are going to think very carefully about how you want to proceed. Because when we return, I am going to have a few questions of my own. And I remind you, I am not the jury. You cannot dazzle me with jargon. Harrison slammed the gavel. Court is in recess for 1 hour. As the bailiff called all rise, Mark collapsed back into his chair. He looked at the USB drive still sticking out of the laptop. He looked at Sarah Jenkins. And for the first time in his life, Mark Bella looked afraid. But the trap wasn't fully sprung yet. Sarah knew they had wounded him. But a wounded billionaire is a dangerous animal. They had proven the possibility of a fake. They hadn't proven he did it. They needed one more push. And they were about to get help from the most unexpected place. The recess ended, but the tension in the courtroom hadn't dissipated. It had curdled. When the bailiff opened the doors, the air felt heavy, like the moments before a thunderclap. Mark Bella returned to the witness stand. He had used the hour well. His hair was smoothed back, his tie straightened. He had regained his composure, likely coached by Arthur Blackwood to deny everything, claim the defense's demonstration was a parlor trick, and stick to the pristine metadata narrative of his own evidence. Sarah Jenkins sat at the defense table. She hadn't said a word to Catherine during the break. She had simply watched the judge's chambers, waiting. "Be seated," Judge Harrison said. He didn't look at the jury. He didn't look at the attorneys. He was staring at a laptop screen that had been set up on his bench during the recess. Next to the laptop was the court transcript from 1998, open to a dog-eared page. "Mr. Bella," the judge began, his voice deceptively soft. "Before the recess, Miss Jenkins demonstrated that voice synthesis technology, specifically the Vocalis's engine, exists and is capable of mimicking your voice. You claimed this was irrelevant because your evidence, the recording of your wife, was authenticated by digital experts." "That is correct, Your Honor," Mark said, his voice steady. "The metadata on my wife's file proves it was created on her phone, by her account. It is immutable." "Immutable," the judge repeated. He tasted the word. "I remember that word. You used it 26 years ago. The logs are immutable, Mr. Prosecutor." "Do you remember saying that?" Mark stiffened. I have testified in many cases, Your Honor." "I'm sure you have," Harrison said, "but I only remember one where a triple homicide suspect walked free because of a timestamp." Arthur Blackwood stood up. "Objection? Relevance? The O'Malley case has no bearing on—" "Sit down, Mr. Blackwood," Harrison barked, slamming his hand on the bench. The sound echoed like a gunshot. "The relevance is the witness's credibility regarding digital evidence." Blackwood sat down, stunned. Harrison turned back to Mark. "During the recess, I had the court's IT specialist, along with Miss Jenkins' team, run a specific query on the confession file you submitted. We didn't look at the audio. We didn't look at the creation date. We looked at the checksum." Mark's eyes flickered. For the first time, the tech genius looked out of his depth. He knew what a checksum was, a digital fingerprint. "Miss Jenkins," the judge said, "please stand and read the author tag found in the deepest layer of the file's hex code, not the metadata you see on the surface. The code underneath." Sarah stood up, holding a sheet of paper. Her hands were shaking, not from fear, but from adrenaline. "The surface metadata lists the author as Catherine S." Sarah read. "But the deep-level hex code, the digital signature left by the creating software, lists the user as admin ghost 98. A collective gasp went through the courtroom, though most didn't understand what it meant. But Mark did. His face drained of color. "Admin ghost 98, the judge repeated. "A unique username, very specific. Tell me, Mr. Bella, why does that name sound familiar to me?" Mark remained silent. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. "I'll tell you why," Harrison said, leaning over the bench, his eyes burning with a cold fire. "Because in 1998, when we finally cracked the encrypted servers of Data Haven, years after O'Malley had disappeared, we found that the fabricated ATM logs were created by a user named admin ghost 98. It was your handle, Mr. Bella. It was your signature. You were arrogant enough to sign your work then, and you were arrogant enough to use the same legacy profile to create this fake confession now." The courtroom erupted. The jury members were whispering frantically. The press gallery was typing furiously. "Order." Harrison didn't bang the gavel. He just shouted, "I have one final question for you, Mr. Bella." The room fell deathly silent. This was it. "You testified that you were in Tokyo when the embezzlement occurred. You testified that you found this recording yesterday. You testified that you are the victim." Judge Harrison took off his glasses. "If I order the bailiff to seize your personal laptop, the one currently sitting in your briefcase at the plaintiff's table, and we search for the profile admin ghost 98, will we find the source files for your wife's fake confession? Or will we find the deletion logs from 10 minutes ago?" Mark Bella looked at his briefcase. He looked at the bailiff, who was already moving toward him. He looked at the jury, who now saw him not as a billionaire, but as a con artist. The silence stretched for 10 seconds. 10 seconds that destroyed an empire. Mark croaked. He loosened his tie. "I need to speak with my attorney." "I think you need to do more than that," Judge Harrison said. "Mr. Blackwood, control your client. He is currently incriminating himself in a felony." Mark suddenly stood up. She was going to leave me, he shouted, his composure shattering completely. She was going to take my son. I built this world. I built everything. She is nothing without me. Sit down, the bailiff yelled, grabbing Mark's arm. I did what I had to do, Mark screamed, spittle flying from his mouth. I protected my legacy. The code is mine. The money is mine. It's all mine. And the confession? Judge Harrison asked calmly. I made it, Mark roared, tearing his arm away from the bailiff. I made it perfectly. It should have worked. You were supposed to be too stupid to look at the hex code. The confession hung in the air, raw and ugly. Sarah Jenkins slowly sat down. She looked at Catherine. Catherine wasn't looking at Mark. She was looking at the photo of her mother on the table. Strike the plaintiff's case, Judge Harrison said, his voice devoid of emotion. Bailiff, take Mr. Bella into custody. I am holding him in contempt of court, and I am referring this matter to the district attorney's office for immediate charges of perjury, fraud, and tampering with evidence. As the officers swarmed Mark Bella, handcuffing the man who thought he was untouchable, he didn't look at the judge. He looked at Catherine. You'll never get a dime, he hissed as they dragged him past her table. Catherine looked him in the eye. Her voice was barely a whisper, but in the silence of the room, everyone heard it. I don't want your dimes, Mark. I just want my son. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic for Bella Dynamics. By the time Mark was booked at the first precinct, the company's stock had plummeted 40%. The board of directors fired him in an emergency session that evening. The tech genius narrative had been replaced by the digital forger. But inside the courtroom, the only thing that mattered was the final decree. 2 days after the arrest, Judge Harrison reconvened the court for the final judgment. Mark was not present. He was being held without bail, considered a high flight risk given his offshore assets. In the matter of Bella v. Bella, Judge Harrison read, his voice echoing in the now less crowded room. The court finds that the prenuptial agreement is null and void, having been signed under duress and enforced through fraudulent means. The court awards full legal and physical custody of Leo Bella to his mother, Catherine Bella. Catherine let out a sob she had been holding for 6 months. Sarah squeezed her hand. Furthermore, Harrison continued, given the egregious nature of the plaintiff's conduct, the fabrication of evidence, the character assassination, and the misuse of proprietary technology to mislead this court, I am awarding punitive damages. Harrison looked up from his papers. Mr. Bella worried about Mrs. Bella leaving with nothing. This court ensures the opposite. Catherine Bella is awarded 50% of the marital assets, including the family estate in Connecticut and the liquid assets currently frozen by the FBI. Additionally, the Bella Hope Foundation will be restored to her sole control, with an endowment of $50 million to be paid from Mr. Bella's personal holdings. He banged the gavel. Case closed. It took 3 months for the dust to settle. Catherine stood on the porch of a farmhouse in Ohio. It wasn't a mansion. It was a simple, beautiful house with a large wraparound porch and a studio where the light hit just right in the mornings. In the yard, an 8-year-old boy was throwing the ball for a golden retriever. Leo looked happy. The shadows under his eyes, caused by months of listening to his father scream at lawyers on the phone, were fading. A car pulled up the gravel driveway. Sarah Jenkins stepped out, holding a bottle of champagne. You look different, Sarah said, walking up the steps. I feel different. Catherine smiled. She wore paint-splattered jeans and a t-shirt. She looked 10 years younger than the woman who had sat in the defendant's chair. The district attorney called. Sarah said, popping the cork. Mark took a plea deal. 10 years. He admitted to the fraud to avoid the embezzlement charges involving the investors. He'll be in federal prison until Leo is 18. Catherine took the glass. She looked out at her son. It's finally over. Not quite, Sarah said, reaching into her bag. She pulled out a letter. This came for you. No return address. Catherine opened the envelope. Inside was a single index card. On it was written a sequence of numbers, a bank account routing number, and a short note. The encryption key for the Cayman account he actually did steal from you. It wasn't 3 million. It was 30. Use it well. E.V. Catherine laughed. Elias Vane. He was still out there, the ghost in the machine. What is it? Sarah asked. Just a reminder, Catherine said, tucking the card into her pocket, that sometimes the good guys win. She raised her glass. To the truth. To the truth, Sarah clinked her glass against Catherine's. As the sun set over the Ohio fields, the chime of the wind chimes on the porch rang out. It wasn't a digital notification. It wasn't a programmed alert. It was just the wind, real and unpredictable, blowing through the trees. Catherine Bella took a deep breath of the fresh air. She had her name back. She had her son. And for the first time in a decade, the silence wasn't empty. It was peaceful. And that brings our story to a close. Mark Bella thought he could code his way out of a marriage, using technology to overwrite the truth. He believed that with enough money and enough fake data, he could convince the world his wife was the villain. But he forgot the one variable he couldn't control: human memory. Judge Harrison never forgot the man who fooled him in 1998, and that arrogance, the admin, ghost, 98 signature became Mark's downfall. Catherine didn't just win her freedom. She exposed a fraud that had been rotting the system for decades. What did you think of the judge's trap? Do you think the punishment fits the crime? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story of justice served cold, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. We post new stories every week. Thanks for watching, and remember, the truth always leaves a trace.